Hey, welcome to Stuff to Blow Your Mind Trailer Talk. My name is Robert Lamb.
And I'm Christian Sager.
And I'm Joe McCormick, and we're the hosts of the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, a science podcast in the How Stuff Works family. This is not the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast. This is Trailer Talk, where we come on here and talk about some movies related to recent episodes. Now, just this week, you guys had a two-parter on the history of LSD and Timothy Leary.
That's right. We focused on the life and the work of Timothy Leary and used that as kind of a model to also discuss the basic science of LSD as well as just a general time frame of its cultural history in America.
Yeah, Leary works out very well to be able to look at when LSD first entered into American research in terms of medical studies and psychological studies, but then also when it became illegal and sort of the struggles between, I guess, what would be called the establishment, the federal government, really, and the people who wanted to research medical capabilities of psychedelics.
Now, Christian, you may have forgotten that you're dressed as an animal, but you are. People might be wondering why you have is that a dog's head on?
No, jeez. It's a red panda.
Oh, okay.
Clearly. Yeah, this is my red panda outfit.
Do you need to explain yourself, or should we just let it stand?
We should just go on. I will say this has pockets, though. It's nice. It's comfy.
All right, so in order to tie into the Leary theme, the LSD theme, we thought, well, let's look at some psychedelic cinema. Now, obviously, there is a ton of psychedelic cinema out there. You, of course, have films that are overtly deal with LSD or psilocybin or DMT. You have films that deal with it a little bit, and then you have films that just channel a general psychedelic feel or vibe. So we tried to focus on films that have at least a strong psychedelic element. There's some sort of psychedelic substance that's referenced or plays a crucial plot point. And we also tried to pick some films that give you a general ebb and flow of America's history with psychedelics.
Hey, before we get into the films, I actually want to tell the audience something.
Oh, yeah.
We are doing a live show. If you're watching this and you're like, what would it be like to be in the room with those three people? You can find out.
It'd be pretty creepy.
Yeah, it would be. But if you want to find out just how creepy, be in New York City on October 6th. We are going to be performing a live version of the podcast where we'll be talking about the science of Stranger Things, and we're going to do this at the Hudson Mercantile. It's all part of New York Comic Con. So if you're interested, you're in that area, or if you're just going to that show and you want to check it out, go to newyorkcomiccon.com or go to our Facebook page, which you're on right now, presumably, and you'll be able to find more information about it.
Yeah, it's what, 18 and up? $15, or is it 15 and up, $18?
Well,
I think either one works, right?
I really don't want any 15-year-olds there.
Okay. All right, but hey, check it out. It's gonna be a blast. It's gonna be kind of like what we have here, except even better. All right. So where should we? Let's see. We already established the episodes this week on Leary. And, of course, we have past episodes that deal with psychedelics and psychedelic figures. Our John C. Lilly episode from last year.
Which will come very much into play during our Stranger Things live show.
Also our Mdma episodes.
Yeah, we did 2 Mdma episodes where we did a similar thing where we talked about the science and research behind MDMA, relating it to Alexander Shulgin, who's thought of as the father of MDMA, who's this infamous chemist who worked on psychedelics.
And Joe, you and I did the episode, The Psychedelic Nightmare of Ergotism.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which we reference because ergot is, of course, a biological precursor for LSD.
Yep.
Yeah.
In fact, some of the ways that you make LSD involve getting a hold of ergot.
All right. Well, let's kick it off here. We're going to start in 1968. So we're just slap dab in the middle of the counterculture movement, of LSD hysteria.
I feel like we should warn people that if you have like photosensitive epilepsy or something, maybe close your eyes for a few minutes. This trailer, it has a lot of cuts in it.
Yes, this trailer is uncomfortable to watch. This trailer is more uncomfortable to watch than some of the scenes in the movies we'll discuss later in this episode.
But this is Head, right?
Yes, this is Head, 1968. This is a Monkees movie.
Yep.
And allegedly the story here is that Jack Nicholson hung out with the Monkees for like a weekend at a California resort. They all smoked a lot of marijuana, and then they took audio notes. Then Jack Nicholson supposedly takes these notes, does a bunch of LSD, and then composes the screenplay. And then voila, you have yourself a motion picture.
You can imagine how well constructed the story is.
Yes.
This movie's pretty intense. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I definitely remember like feeling discombobulated.
Yeah.
And I also want to point out, too, Jack Nicholson is deeply connected to one of the movies that we had to cut from the list here. He's in Easy Rider, which is
right.
another great, like, psychedelic LSD kind of precursor movie. And I'm assuming this is after Easy Rider. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, Easy Rider, we've discussed it a little bit. We talked about it briefly in our biker episode because Easy Rider brings so many B-movie exploitation cinema elements together in a movie that is generally not considered a B-movie or an exploitation film. It's considered an important work of American cinematic history. But you have bikers and drugs and
Dennis Hopper.
Talk of UFOs and aliens. It's a wonderful film.
In a film with Dennis Hopper, you don't even really need motorcycles. You could basically just ride him around the country.
That's right.
And you know what's also really interesting is, like, being a kid in the 80s, there was just a lot of Monkees reruns on TV.
There was,
and it
yeah.
wasn't that psychedelic, you know? And then you watch this and you're like, wait a minute, what?
Now, I want to ask you guys something, because I can enjoy some psychedelic imagery, but when I look at a movie like Head, I get a strong feeling of just sort of famous person arrogance.
Yeah.
There's this feeling that these are some dudes who were famous, who were rich, and who thought that maybe just anything they made on the fly might be gold.
Yeah.
And that you, as a result of that mentality, you get movies like this. What do y'all think about that?
I agree. I think, well, it depends, but I think we'll find that in another one of the movies we're going to cover here today. But this movie in particular is a good tie-in to Timothy Leary, because Timothy Leary was a lot like what you're describing in terms of, like, him becoming a famous celebrity figure and not really actually being an advocate for the psychedelic research scene.
Like, not necessarily putting in the hard work, but just thinking that once you're famous, once you're rich, you can just kind of do whatever and it'll be good.
But all that said, I do think there's value to this film and other just kind of psychedelic romp movies, because I think then what you get is the inspiration to go and use these same techniques in a narrative-based format where they can have some really potent effects, I guess.
Yeah.
You know, like, I guess we'll see that. Actually, Beyond the Black Rainbow is probably a good example, but we'll see that in some other movies. But I think without Head or without Holy Mountain and some of these other movies that are just insane romps, that, yeah, you wouldn't necessarily have the same visual stuff going on in later films.
Well, you've already mentioned it by name, and therefore it must appear. Let's move on to 1973's Holy Mountain.
Oh, boy.
Now, I will say, I think this movie is more visually creative than Head.
Oh, yes,
A lot
yes.
more work went into it. You could still debate its merits, though.
I think the most interesting thing about Holy Mountain is the set design and the costume design, actually. Yeah.
The music, I think the music
Oh, yeah.
is really
There's
good.
some interesting music. That's true, too. Yeah.
But speaking of arrogance, that might be on display here, too.
Oh, yes. Well, it is. That's the thing. It's Alejandro Jodorowsky. And if you're familiar with the man at all and his work and his reputation, there is a lot of arrogance there. There is a lot of just raw creativity as well. And you see that in this film. This is a film that I have a lot of love for parts of because it is so just beautiful and captivating for maybe the first 30 minutes and then goes on about like an hour or more too long.
You don't like the
It's
stuff
I
where
think
they
it's
like put
almost
the
2
A-team
hours.
together of all the like people from various planets. Like there's the person from Saturn, the
Yeah.
person from Jupiter, the person from Mars.
Now, Robert had mentioned off
There they
camera
are.
that he's a big fan of the poop alchemy scene.
The poop alchemy scene is memorable. Look, okay,
Can
so
you basically describe it?
We should do a science episode on whether or not you can turn your own feces into gold.
I want to say, refresh it. You've watched it more recently than I haven't watched it since college, where I watched it was a VHS dub of the Japanese Laserdisc.
yeah, I
Because
just watched
that used to be the
yesterday.
only way to see this.
Right,
film.
because it
That's
was
how you used to
unavailable.
see movies,
This is
yeah.
actually an interesting story. It was unavailable for 30 years in the United States. My understanding is John Lennon, somebody else who's famous, was another one of the Beatles.
My understanding it was Alan Klein,
Yeah,
the manager of the Beatles.
Yeah, they talked Alan Klein into funding Jodorowsky for this film. And then he made it, and then they had some kind of falling out, and Klein refused to let him have the rights for 30-plus years, and you just could not get it in the West.
Yeah, and finally Klein died, and Jodorowsky's still with us. The first 30 minutes of this is devoid of dialogue, and in my opinion, the first 30 minutes is must-see. You have this Christ character wandering around and encountering this bizarre Buddhist alchemist-type character.
There's a staging of the conquest of Mexico done with toads dressed as little monks and conquistadors.
And chameleons.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. This movie... I saw it for the first time yesterday.
Scenes.
I mean, this alone, like I was watching this and I was like, man, can you imagine how long they spent painting this set just to get this just right? It's pretty wild, but the movie itself is just incomprehensible and irritating.
I would say it is visually creative, but I get the sense that it embodies a reprehensible mentality.
Well, let me segue into that. I have some notes from the podcast that connect to Timothy Leary's mindset and maybe how Alejandro Jodorowsky was potentially inspired by him. Yeah, this is one of our producer Ramsey's favorite scenes.
This is one of the moments I forgot.
Yeah.
I tend to only remember the best scenes.
So this is a guy with jaguar heads for nipples?
Yeah, this is where Tiger Balm comes from.
Yeah.
So this is from a New Yorker article about Timothy Leary written by Louis Menand, and he says, the only things Leary was serious about were pleasure and renown. He underwent no fundamental transformation when he left the academic world for the counterculture. He liked women, he liked being the center of attention, and he liked to get high. He was a counterculture salesman, and he wore, on every occasion, the same blissed-out smile, a rictus somewhere between a beatific, what-me-worry grin and a movie star's frozen stare into the flashbulbs. One of his ex-wives described it as the smile of the ego actually eating the personality. That's what I think of when I see Holy Mountain.
So he's kind of a tripped-out Alfred E. Newman.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Alfred E. Newman maybe offered culture more than Timothy Leary
So
did.
now that you guys have done this on Timothy Leary, I have to ask, do you get the sense that he was 100% a charlatan, or...
No, I would know, not 100%.
He meant well. But I think that his own failings, I guess, kind of kept him from being the guru leader of the psychedelic movement that he kind of painted himself out to be.
Yeah, he had a lot of self-destructive tendencies, and he also just became addicted to fame, and I think these, it's more complex than that. But
well, do you think a lot of his talk about discovery and mind expansion and all that was really just a pretense for something more related to pleasure and entertainment?
Oh, we have a question coming in. Sid is responding to our question about what your favorite LSD movie. He says the classic film The Trip, starring Jack Nicholson.
Another one.
That was also on our list, but we had to cut it out. Yeah.
Okay, let me answer your question, though, Joe. The way I tend to think about this is I think to another sort of psychedelic Avenger character. I think to Alan Watts.
Mm-hmm.
Alan Watts spoke of psychedelic substances as kind of like a microscope or a telescope. This is a common metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
I think Leary even used it occasionally. But the thing about a microscope or a telescope is you don't just walk around with it shackled to your face all the time. The idea is that you're supposed to use it, gain some insight about the world, and then enact with that world in a new way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a lot of the things you see, and especially in these films like Holy Mountain, a film that supposedly was, came together and was even filmed with key participants taking LSD and psilocybin.
Have you read the Wikipedia entry summary of the pre-production on that?
I haven't, but I've read materials about the production.
Yeah, it's absolutely
Can you just imagine
insane.
the odors?
It's just so crazy. Like, as I was reading it, actually, when I was watching the movie last night, I was like, this can't be real. It has to be made up. Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that with Leary and with films like this is that it tends to accidentally sell or even intentionally sell this vision of just psilocybin and other psychedelic substances as just a complete transformation of reality and a complete transformation of personal reality. And I think it's a little more nuanced than that. I mean, the research shows that it's far more nuanced than that. It supports more of this metaphor for telescope, microscope discovery.
I think too, there's just a sort of inherent desire in us as an audience sometimes to just just get to the experience of an altered state that isn't this one, right? Like, just, I don't care about all the, like, researchy stuff or the medicine or the psychology. Just, like, get me out of this world right now, you know? In the same way that I guess you could say about, like, just, like, fantasy films, right?
Yeah. All right.
Well, before we go on to the next movie, I guess we should remind you, if you're just tuning in, you don't know who we are. We're the hosts of the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, a science podcast in the How Stuff Works family. This is not the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast. This is Trailer Talk, where we talk about movies related to recent episodes. These guys did a couple episodes this week on Timothy Leary and the history and science of LSD, and so we're taking a look at some LSD, acid trip kind of movies, some psychedelic cinema. What else?
I think we should just ask the audience, if you've got any questions, now's the time to ask. Like, if you want to tell us about what your thoughts are on Timothy Leary, or your favorite LSD movies, or your favorite psychedelic cinema, all of that stuff is up for grabs. We've got our buddy Nathan here in the studio, and he can pass those on along to us so we can respond to you in real time.
And of course, if you're not already subscribed to our podcast, go wherever you get your podcasts and do that right now. You can do that at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, all that fun stuff, or you can go to stufftoblowyourmind.com, where there's everything we do.
All right, so far with our two films we've talked about, we've been riding that wave of psychedelic enthusiasm, and now, in the words of Hunter S. Thompson, we're going to get to the place where, quote, the wave finally broke and rolled back. So we're fast-forwarding, film-wise, we're fast-forwarding to 1998.
Yeah.
But in terms of the times that this is exploring, and also in terms of when the book was written, it falls in right where we left off.
Hey, guys, I got a question.
Yeah.
Remember when you could tolerate Johnny Depp in a film?
I hope we get to that place again.
Me too.
No, I mean, I love him in Ed Wood. I love him in Fear and Loathing in
He's
Las
amazing
Vegas.
in this movie, yeah.
It was before the Willy Wonka phase.
Yeah. Well, yeah, so this is, there's Benicio del Toro as well, playing Dr. Gonzo. This is a fabulous film.
Yep.
This is just a wonderful romp. God, what can you say about Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
It's beautifully
Something
done.
about the golf shoes.
Terry Gilliam really went above and beyond, I think, in like bringing Thompson's vision to life. I think it's arguable that I think like this is the defining Thompson film, right? Even though there's Rum Diary, and what's the other one with Bill Murray?
Where the Buffalo roam.
Where the Buffalo roam. Yeah. This movie's stunning, especially the scene that we're watching right now. Which, my understanding, were we talking about this the other day?
Yeah, you told me about the budget.
They spent some crazy amount of money of their budget to create the scene in the bar with the lizard people. Yeah,
It's a reptile house.
it's pretty amazing.
So this movie is very funny, and it's very quotably funny, but it also, I think, does have some interesting insights about the end of the idealism. You know,
Yeah.
one of the things you notice in the film is that the characters are still, you know, taking all these drugs, but all of this idealism about making new discoveries and stuff like that in the psychedelic realms beyond, that's kind of fallen away. And there's a sadder core to the psychedelic experience in this movie.
Yeah.
Right around this time was actually when Leary himself was starting to turn against the movement in a strange way.
Or at least having to correct course, in part out of self-preservation.
Yeah, exactly. So he was getting in a lot of trouble, getting arrested over and over again, escaping from prison, coming back, and he essentially like had to do a lot of public events where he sort of called out his former allies in the psychedelic movement. One of these was he gave a talk at Manhattan Town Hall in New York, and he said that LSD is a problem because, and this is a direct quote, LSD may be creating a new race of mutants. So this is where you get this kind of stuff that leads to the sort of paranoia of Fear and Loathing. Now, to clarify on that, what he actually meant was he wanted a 1-year moratorium on LSD usage in deference to the law. And the idea here was that he wanted the law and the psychedelic researchers to sort of come together, everybody stop taking LSD all the time, figure out how, what the truth was behind the substance, and then sort of maturely move on.
Yeah, the idea was that the mainstream culture would catch up with the counterculture. So one of the interesting things
Wait,
here...
and that was like right before the 1980s?
No, this was the late 60s.
Yeah.
Oh, the late 60s. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
So one of the things here is that on one hand, you just have sort of a cultural crash.
Yeah.
of the optimism of the 1960s. But then if you do focus in on the drugs, we see that with the research as well. Like all this counterculture, the counterculture vibe helps kill off the enthusiasm and just any ability to get funding for many of these studies into the powerful and potentially helpful properties of psilocybin, LSD, marijuana, all these other substances.
We talked about this in the episode, but like researchers that we have like this group that we refer to as the Psychedelic Avengers, and we've done a series of episodes on them. There's John C. Lilly, Sasha Sulgan, Alan Watts, Timothy Leary. I guess you could maybe qualify Wilhelm Reich under there, although he wasn't really involved in psychedelics that much. But the idea here, though, is that like a lot of those people weren't actually able to do the research that they wanted to do because it became an illegal substance for them to tamper with.
Our listener Callum says, sweaty movie, referring to Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
It's true.
It is a sweaty movie.
They sprayed these guys down more than The Rock gets sprays down.
We are coming up on a really nasty, clammy movie in just a moment.
I gotta be honest, I'm pretty sweaty right now.
Well, you are wearing
I wonder
a beast
why.
skin.
Yeah.
All right, before we move on, I do want to just read a quick quote from Hunter S. Thompson that I think sums a lot of this up. You're probably all familiar with this one, but he says, "We're all wired into a survival trip now. No more of the speed that fueled the 60s. That was the fatal flaw in Tim Leary's trip. He crashed around America selling consciousness expansion without ever giving a thought to the grim meat-hook realities that were lying in wait for all the people who took him seriously. All those pathetically eager acid freaks who thought they could buy peace and understanding for $3 a hit. But their loss and failure is ours too. What Leary took down with him was the central illusion of a whole lifestyle that he helped create. A generation of permanent cripples, failed seekers, who never understood the essential old mystic fallacy of the acid culture. The desperate assumption that somebody, or at least some force, is tending the light on the end of the tunnel."
I think there should be a petition to have Robert Lamb play Hunter S. Thompson in the upcoming adaptation of Fear and Loathing on the Campaign Trail, 1972.
Are they going to do a film of that?
No, but we'll make one for you.
Well, I'm not mumbling enough. I need to be more mumbling.
You should do a dramatic reading for a recording of his obituary for Richard Nixon.
Oh, yeah?
I think it's called He Was a Crook.
You know what's kind of an interesting thing that a lot of people might not realize is that Hunter S. Thompson seems to be like this one linking factor between a lot of us here at How Stuff Works. Like if you ask almost anybody who hosts one of the podcasts here, he's kind of an influence on them. Like I know Josh and Chuck are both really influenced by him. We are obviously.
Tracy, Holly, everybody's a big Hunter S. Thompson.
Tracy, a huge Hunter S. Thompson fan.
All right, well, we're going to move on to another film at this point. Anything we need to say before we move on?
I guess not, except if you're just tuning in, we are the hosts of the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast, a science podcast in the How Stuff Works family. This is not the Stuff to Blow Your Mind podcast. This is Trailer Talk, where we talk about movies related to recent episodes. These guys this week had a couple of episodes on Timothy Leary and the science and history of LSD, so we're talking about acid movies, psychedelic cinema, and if you're not subscribed to our podcast, you should go get subbed right now. Go to stufftoblowyourmind.com or go check out Stuff to Blow Your Mind on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever else you want to get your stuff.
And hey, do you have any questions for us? Ask them, because we're right here and we're willing to answer.
Okay, so we hit the end of the wave. The wave crashed. The enthusiasm and discovery vibe of the psychedelic era, especially in the late 60s, as promoted by Timothy Leary, is kind of falling apart in the 70s. So what do we get to? Blue Sunshine.
Yes, 1977.
Directed by Jeff Lieberman? Is that right?
This is the guy, for you MST fans out there, this is the guy who directed Squirm. Now you're going to be the worm face, that guy. This is, of the films of his that I've seen, this is the best.
This movie is kind of great, but also hard to watch because it is so ugly. It's got that, that 70s vibe. Just before we came in, I was asking a friend of ours in the office here, Casey, about what it is about the look of this movie that is so hideous, and he didn't have one easy answer. He said, it's a lot about how movies were made in the 70s, about the way the film stock then responded to color, about the kinds of lenses they used, and also possibly just about how it was preserved or not well preserved. But anyway, this movie is full of disgusting oranges and tans that just invade your eyes and hurt your brain. And maybe that's appropriate because the plot of this film is about people who took a bad batch of LSD in 1967 and exactly 10 years later all their hair falls off and they go insane and start killing people.
Yeah, I love this because on one hand it plays on the fears of former flower children. You know, they're living their adult lives with perhaps the occasional concern for the the health ramifications of their past indulgence.
The reputation.
Yeah, the reputation.
It's like one character has become a politician.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and another character we see is a mom and your typical nuclear family. And then suddenly this stuff comes back to haunt them. Everything that seemed optimistic and fun in the past is suddenly dreadful and horrifying in the present.
There is a famous scene in this movie where a wild-eyed, completely bald man attacks a discotheque.
Yes.
And he runs through attacking the dancers. It's pretty fabulous.
Yeah, so the LSD in this is called Blue Sunshine. That's
right.
The strain of it that was taken. And 10 years later, it causes all your hair to fall out and you become a rampaging psychopath. Mm-hmm. And then, Zalman King has to shoot you. This is Zalman King in the lead. He was more of an actor at this point, but he went on to mostly make his name for directing high-end erotica, Red Shoe Diaries, Delta of Venus.
Wait, did that have Mulder in it?
Yeah, he was in the TV show, yeah.
So he directed Mulder in erotica.
Yeah. Like
wow.
And we were talking about this, Joe. It kind of makes sense when you look at his performance in this. It seems like the performance of a guy who was maybe looking to get out of acting.
He's not. He's got kind of a face for acting in a way. Like he looks kind of like you were pointing this out. He looks kind of like Sean Penn.
Yeah, he does.
But his behavior is a little bit alien, and he's got this problem. You've probably seen movies like this before, where there is a protagonist who is being framed for a crime, or somebody believes they did something they didn't do, and the protagonist just keeps doing really incriminating stuff. Mm-hmm. So he does stuff like this, like he'll show up at a murder scene and then get the victim's blood all over himself and pick up the knife and stand there holding it until a witness runs in and sees him. And then they'll be like, murder! And instead of just saying, no, you don't understand, I didn't do it, he'll run at them and try to cover their mouth and say, shut up!
I love these eyes. I wonder how they did that. Hey, I want to throw something in here from the episode just so we can make it clear for our audience, too. That there is science that's been done on the idea of bad trips and flashbacks related to LSD use, which is obviously the inspiration for Blue Sunshine. But I think that we should make it clear, because there was this moratorium on being able to do any kind of neuroscience research on the LSD, the effects of LSD on the brain, we don't know a ton about it. It's not clear what causes bad trips, but it seems that they result in fear and paranoia. Treatment usually requires people to just have a quiet space to come down. Sometimes, though, you have to give people anti-anxiety medication or tranquilizers, but we should be clear that there is no evidence that this is like the urban legend that LSD stores up in your spine and then inevitably 7 years later or 10 years later.
You pick up an axe, and there's Grandma.
There's no evidence of that.
It's kind of like the establishment was saying, sorry, hippies, we can't research it. We're not going to research it. Whatever happens is going to happen.
Right.
And then in comes the exploitation film to take advantage of it.
So we have a comment from Marshall. Marshall asks, did you already discuss Altered States or Jacob's Ladder?
We are going to discuss one of those movies.
Mm-hmm. You'll have to stay tuned in to find out which one.
It's coming up.
All right. Let's see. Anything else we want to say about this? I assume the title is a reference to the brown acid of Woodstock. I imagine a number of you have heard the audio of that where they're warning people not to take the brown acid.
Right. Yeah. And Altamont, wasn't that a thing at Altamont as well? Or is that something different that I'm thinking?
I'm not sure.
Altamont is where there was a murder.
Right, but there was, I believe that there was some idea that there were bad drugs behind that, but maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, another fun fact, Jeff Goldblum allegedly almost had a role in this film. He almost played the doctor.
That would have made it. I assume that's the main character's friend, who it turns out was the character who distributed the bad LSD to people back in the day.
Yeah, I think Lieberman decided that Zalman King and young Goldblum looked too much alike, and so it would be confusing for the audience. I don't know.
Well, are we ready for the next film? Which is one of the films that was just suggested. This is one of my all-time favorite movies.
Yeah,
I love this movie.
1980's Altered States.
Yeah, and this film, for those of you unaware of it, but maybe you have seen the recent television show Fringe, this was the major inspiration for that TV show Fringe. In fact, the lead actress from Altered States goes on to be in Fringe.
Also,
Is William Hurt in Fringe?
He's not, but they got Leonard Nimoy instead.
so this film concerns the use of isolation tanks or sensory deprivation tanks. And this was one of the creations of a noted researcher and psychonaut John C. Lilly, who we had an episode about from last year. Check that out if you want to hear more about him. But
Now, I think this movie was actually written by Patty Chayefsky, wasn't it?
is,
Who
yep.
wrote Network.
And it's directed by Ken Russell, is that right?
yeah, Ken Russell directed it. It's based very much on some of the writings. The original book was based on some of the writings of John C. Lilly as well. John C. Lilly has a cameo in this film, and it's stoked. It's just crammed full of Lilliness.
I mean, if you ever wanted to see a psychedelic movie transform into a werewolf movie, pretty
Yes.
much, that's what happens here.
Yeah.
So this movie, though, is actually an interesting reflection of what was going on in psychedelic research before the whole Timothy Leary explosion in the mid-'60s. So you did have some researchers investigating whether psychedelics could treat mental health disorders or addiction. They were also looking into it as being something for end-of-life care. The federal government actually funded 116 of these studies between 1953 and 1973. But then by 1965, very few researchers were allowed to possess LSD. Only 6 projects in 1969 were federally allowed. And then by 1974, the National Institutes of Mental Health declared that LSD had, quote, no real therapeutic value. So,
No, I
a couple
imagine
years later, you get Altered States.
I imagine there are researchers today who disagree with that.
There are lots of researchers who disagree with that. And we go through a sort of broad variety of studies in the first part of our two-parter on LSD and Timothy Leary, talking about what little research is able to be done now on not just LSD, but other psychedelics, including psilocybin, and what kind of medical or mental health uses they
Yeah, a
have.
lot more of the studies that are going on today seem to involve psilocybin.
Yeah, in fact, here's just a quote from the episode. The early results broadly suggest that when used by people who do not have a family history or risk of psychological problems, psychedelics can make us kinder, calmer, and better at our jobs.
Now, I imagine that is cautioned with a lot of nuance, and we're not just recommending people take psychedelics.
No, in fact, and this is why I recommend that people listen to the episode, because there's a lot that goes into it that is sort of skipped over when you're just recreationally using psychedelics, like a controlled setting, for instance, or being with somebody that you trust who's a professional who understands the situation.
Yeah, we discuss it a lot in terms of a scientist and a shaman. So even traditional ancient practices that involved the hallucinogenics, there would be somebody to provide the setting, provide the expectations, provide guidance, and to aid in interpretation. That would be the shaman. Some of these recent studies, you have scientists taking on and psychologists taking on that same role.
Yeah.
To make sense of it. It's one you can't just point a microscope at anything or point a telescope at anywhere. You have to know where to look, and you have to know how to incorporate that data.
This
And
movie,
that's
though,
where they come in.
Man, this movie is so good, and it's. I feel like it's underappreciated. It's so good, but I don't hear people talk about it very often.
It's
You need to talk to my friends more.
Maybe, yeah.
I guess that one of the things is it's not of films of this type, and even among Ken Russell films. I guess here's the thing: Ken Russell films tend not to be that fun.
Right.
Like he made some
Oh,
great
I don't know
films.
about that.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm thinking of
Devils.
the Devils.
Yeah.
Lair of the White Worm, that's pretty fun.
Lair of the White Worm is pretty fun. I'll give you that. But a lot of his other films are less fun, but still very good, very strong visuals. It's just, I don't know, not the kind of thing you necessarily share gifts about.
Right.
I've got a
yeah.
controversial opinion. I think Ken Russell...
Hey, we're back to the Jaguar
All right.
spitting milk out.
I'd say Ken Russell's scariest movie is Tommy.
Oh, yeah. I forgot that he did that.
Yeah, that's right. All right, are you guys ready for our last film of the day?
Well-
if you out there have any questions, now is the time to ask, because we've only got one movie left.
Robert, I believe this is one of your favorite films of all time we're about to look at.
It is. This is one of my favorite films.
In all seriousness.
In all seriousness. And it's, in all seriousness, probably my favorite film that's come out in the 21st century. This is Beyond the Black Rainbow from 2010. It is a film by Panos Cosmatos, the son of director George P. Cosmatos, who directed Tombstone, Rambo, and First Blood. It strongly references some of the films we've discussed here today, other bits of psychedelic and semi-psychedelic cinema. Blue Sunshine is expressly referenced. Mm-hmm. It is a beautiful, beautiful-looking film. It has a fabulous soundtrack by Sonoa Caves. This is the solo project of Jeremy Schmidt, the keyboardist for the band Black Mountain. Oh man. I should back up and just explain what this film is. First of all, it has an extremely slow pace. Anyone who's ever watched it, it is downright quaaludic, I guess you'd say.
I've never made it through.
Oh.
I need to find, there has to be the right moment where I'm in the right state of mind to be able to make it through this movie.
Yes.
I will say it is not plot heavy. By the end, there is a plot, but you could explain the plot in probably 3 or 4 sentences.
Yeah, and those 3 and 4 sentences are basically, you have this Arborea Institute that's founded by this guy Mercurio Arborea, who's like a kind of a psychedelic Leary, Lilly-esque figure. Mm-hmm. All the optimism of the 60s is present in this facility. Then you fast forward to the 80s, and you have these 2 main characters, Dr. Billy Nye, and then the girl, whose name eludes me, Elena.
Wait, I think you said Billy Nye. That can't be his name.
Not Billy Nye.
That'd be great.
Barry Nile. I'm sorry.
That's actually what
Bill Nye.
This is about Bill Nye running a secret psychedelic research facility where he imprisons
You know
psychics.
what it is?
Yeah.
I know why you mixed it up. Because remember, Timothy Leary's millionaire who funded him was named Mr. Billy.
Oh, okay. Maybe that's it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm
Okay.
imagining Bill Nye the Science Guy peeling his hair off and taking out his contact lenses to reveal his psychopath eyes. So the idea here is that Dr. Arborea creates this. There's some sort of a psychedelic baptism involving this black goo that you see, and in I think it's 1966. His protege here, Barry, immerses himself in this, has this terrifying psychedelic experience, and he comes out Blue Sunshine. He comes out an inhuman psychopath. And then Arborea also puts his infant daughter, into this baptism as well, and she comes out as a psychic. And so we have in the present 1980s setting of the film, Elena held captive by Barry, while the senior Arborea just goes continually more crazy in like a grotesque bunker.
It's certainly a beautiful movie. Very much like, this is what I was talking about earlier. Like, it takes what movies like Holy Mountain and Head sort of cultivated and uses it, I think, for like a stronger purpose.
But I would say with more of a sci-fi aesthetic.
Yes, yeah, it has a very strong sci-fi aesthetic. There are elements of it that are it gets kind of slasher movie-esque for a little bit, but not in a way that's like really off-putting.
This is a very weird and very unique movie, and I really liked it too. It is slow-paced. I can see how it might be hard for some people to finish, but I think it is visually beautiful. It is an experience, and it's rewarding.
Yeah. The first time I watched it, I had some misgivings about it. I was like, well, that was really great in places, but I wonder if this or I wonder if that. Second time I watched it, I just realized, nope, it's perfect the way it is.
So do we have any comments or questions that we need to respond to, Nathan? None. Okay. Well, maybe you guys are all on psychedelics right now, hopefully with a doctor present or a shaman, and you are being treated for something like cancer or mental illness.
Yeah. Well, and also we'll remind everyone you don't have to take drugs to have a psychedelic experience. It is obtainable through other methods, including watching some of these films here today.
Very much, yeah. As Ram Dass would recommend. Ram Dass, an old buddy of Timothy Leary's.
Yeah.
Oh, and here we have now. I almost forgot.
Oh,
I almost forgot.
We're here looking
Timothy
at a
Leary's
clip from Wes Craven's best movie, Shocker, starring Mitch Pileggi of X-Files fame, and a young Peter Berg, who would go on to be a director. Much like Zalman King, the kind of uncomfortable actor goes on to direct movies. Peter Berg, I feel like it's the same way. He's kind of uncomfortable acting. He's not quite natural. There's a lot of him making the face.
Peter Berg's actually in one of the movies we talked about a couple of weeks ago. He's in Fire in the Sky.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, he is.
But yeah, he's mostly a director now. But anyway, yeah, Mitch Pileggi here is playing a serial killer in the movie Shocker who gets turned into electricity. And in this scene, the hero and the villain dive into the television and channel surf, literally, going from one channel to another and participating inside the programming. Here they arrive at a TV preacher doing his sermon, and the TV preacher is
Timothy Leary.
It's actually played by Dr. Timothy Leary.
This must have been a very short couple of years before he passed away, actually.
Yeah,
Well,
I'd imagine.
What is the possible metaphysics of this scene we're watching? Like, how does this...
It doesn't
It's
make
impossible.
analytical sense.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, unless you think of being could be composed of electricity, and if so, could actually arrive in pre-taped programming. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird movie for sure. I like other Wes Craven movies better. People Under the Stairs, Serpent in the Rainbow, which we talked about last week, actually.
Yeah, that came up as well.
So, I was kidding about this being his best film, but if you couldn't tell. But I think there's something worth seeing here. Like, it's a bad movie, but if you go back and you watch when they talked about it on Siskel and Ebert at the movies, or and the movies, whatever that is, there's this weird moment where, of course, Ebert is making all the correct criticisms of it, and the fact that the plot doesn't make any sense and so forth. But you could tell Gene Siskel was embarrassed, but he just kind of liked it, and he just wanted other people to see it. And he was just like, just get in there, see Shocker.
That's awesome. All right, well, I guess that's it.
Yeah.
Again, we couldn't possibly cover all of the psychedelic films out there. We couldn't even cover all, like, the psychedelic horror films.
We had to cut our list in half,
Yeah.
basically, to get it to this long. So, yeah, we certainly would have loved to have covered other things. But please, if you want more information on this, go check out the podcast. We've got those 2 parts. The first part came out on Tuesday. Second part came out yesterday on Timothy Leary and the science of LSD.
That's right. So you tuned in, turned off.
Turned on.
All right, and now I guess it's time to drop out.
It's time to
There's
drop
really
out,
only thing left
everybody.
to do. All right, well,
See ya.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Oh, there's an axe.
You learned almost too late that man is a feeling creature. And because of it, the greatest in the universe. He learned too late for himself that men have to find their own way to make their own mistakes. There can't be any gift of perfection from outside ourselves. And when men seek such perfection, they find only death, fire, loss, disillusionment, and the end of everything that's gone forward. Men have always sought an end to toil and misery. It can't be given, it has to be achieved. There is hope, but it has to come from inside, from man himself.